So the SABC has expressed concern after the ANC's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula, blamed the organization's head of news for content he claims cost the party electoral support this month. Mbalula cried foul because of a service delivery program that laid the party's municipal government failures bare ahead of the elections. Support for the ANC has dropped to historic levels in the local government elections, and the party has lost control of big municipalities, including Johannesburg and Tshwane. Mbalula's comments have been roundly criticized by media organizations. Let's get more perspective on this and speak to Media Monitoring Africa Director William Bird. William, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So how does a service delivery program by the public broadcaster amount to decampaigning the ANC?
Well, I guess if you put it in perspective, in 2016, when we had our last local government elections, you then had Mr. Hladi Motsoneng as running effectively the SABC. And just before this, you had them implementing the protest coverage ban. So you had a very different kind of approach by the public broadcaster. Suddenly now, you have an approach where the public broadcaster says, no, we're going to cover all parties fairly equitably in line with our mandate. And that's pretty much what they've done. So for the ANC, of course, this comes as a bit of a surprise because they may have been expecting, similar treatment to what they received in 2016. That said, this shouldn't be a surprise given the kind of coverage that they received in 2019, which for the general elections, which was fair, balanced and accurate. And overwhelmingly, our media in South Africa are fair and accurate in the way that they cover the elections. So I think, this is really just trying to scapegoat and not deal with the real issues of what's really facing the ANC.
And I suppose in response, the SABC rather, could easily say to Mbalula that, well, if there weren't such glaring service delivery failures, there'd be nothing of the sort to report.
Yeah, there's that, but there's also the simple fact that says there's a very clear process that if people have an issue, as they have for many elections previously, if there's an issue for any media house during the elections, you can report it to the IEC, you can go straight to the Complaints Compliance Committee within ICASA, it gets expedited in terms of its process, and they can deal with these things. If they had a legitimate concern, and nothing to say that they may not have in some instances, but if they had a legitimate concern, the easy thing to do would be to go and report that at the time of the elections. To come now and to do it in a public forum and to go then specifically and approach the head of news and attack her, for merely for doing her job, that looks like something a lot closer to interference and into something that looks a little bit more like intimidation. That kind of thing from the ANC is completely unacceptable.
And to be clear, you made reference to the Hladi Motsoneng years. That is the most recent SABC history, but the public broadcaster has always been, perhaps not always, but has to a degree over the last few years, even, shall I suggest, at its formation was already contested terrain politically. Let's talk about why that is, why it is that the government of the day, whichever it is, always seeks to have such a loud voice and control over the SABC.
Well, of course they do, because, it's the biggest broadcaster in the country. Their radio listenership reaches like over 28 million people every day. They're reaching half the country. So it's with that kind of thing, and when you're speaking to people in their own language and all the African languages, and when you've got the biggest footprint, and when it is the public broadcaster, like most governments around the world, where, the option isn't, in fact, to have a proper independent broadcaster. They think it's a state broadcaster. They expect that they can use it for their own ends. And, the ANC, to varying degrees, has at least attempted that for years. What we've seen significantly, and, it's to the SABC board's credit that when this occurred, they, as I understand it, they lodged a complaint. But they've also, the head of news has also then said this is not acceptable. The fact that this is coming out and that, we're seeing the board reasserting their independence through that statement is a really, really incredibly positive thing. If anything, the ANC should be going, yes, actually, we've done the right thing. Under the ANC government, the SABC is able to operate in a manner that supports and reinforces its independence. And that's a really good thing for our democracy and for our media sector more broadly.
And you've got then another development in the last 24 hours. I've not seen confirmation by the public broadcaster, but it's been reported by the likes of Times Live that the head of news, Patricia Makopeni, is now facing an investigation of some sort for the airing of an investigative program that had been gagged through a court order. Some of the reaction has been that the timing is too much of a coincidence. Should we be reading anything, any link between the two?
Well, you know, I'd be a bit reluctant to do that because they do seem to be quite separate incidents, you know, and on the basis of what is in the public domain, that may be a bridge too far to kind of make that connection. Of course, it is the SABC, and of course, when anything like that happens with the head of news, you do need to be skeptical. You do need to ask questions. What we do know from that incident, from having read the story in the Times and other media, is that if it is true that the SABC broadcast a program in contravention of a court order, you know, Patricia Makopeni is the head of news, and that's where the buck ultimately under the editorial policy stops with her. So to a degree, it's a clear and logical thing that they would need to say, we need to charge her at least under this, and hopefully, you know, what I'm hoping we'll see is that there is an investigation, that they make those findings public to say, this is what happened and this is how, these are the steps we're putting in place to make sure that this kind of thing can't ever happen again, because it is a very serious thing for the SABC to broadcast something in contravention of a court order. Any media house that does that would have to almost immediately, you know, to lay charges against whichever person was responsible.
William Bird, Director at Media Monitoring Africa. Good to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.